President Trump's tariffs continue to be in legal limbo, but if the Supreme Court rules them illegal, it could cost the U.S. up to $1 trillion. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told NBC News' Meet the Press that the U.S. would have to refund about half of the tariffs that would have already been collected.
Imagine the U.S. government suddenly being forced to pay back nearly $1 trillion. That's the potential financial bombshell now looming over Washington. At the center of the storm is former President Donald Trump's aggressive use of tariffs, a signature policy tool of his America First agenda. Two federal courts have already ruled that many of these emergency tariffs were illegal. Trump, however, has appealed to the Supreme Court, demanding a reversal. The stakes could not be higher. If the court sides against Trump, the government may be legally obligated to refund importers between $750 billion and $1 trillion, one of the largest potential payouts in American history. The case is not just about money, it's about presidential power, global trade, and the limits of executive authority. This is the story of how Trump's tariffs sparked $1 billion battle, why the legal fight has reached the nation's highest court, and what it means for America's economy and democracy. Chapter 1. The tariff wars begin. When Donald Trump took office, he wasted no time reshaping America's trade policy. Declaring that unfair trade practices had hollowed out U.S. manufacturing, he slapped tariffs on steel, aluminum, Chinese goods, and a wide range of imports. These tariffs were framed as emergency measures, justified under laws giving presidents authority to protect national security. For Trump, tariffs were more than policy. They were political theater. He used them to pressure trading partners, punish adversaries, and rally his base around the idea of protecting American workers. But critics warned from the start that the tariffs were excessive, economically damaging, and legally questionable. By bypassing Congress, Trump relied on emergency powers that courts are now scrutinizing. What began as a bold economic gamble has turned into a massive legal liability. Chapter 2. Importers fight back. For U.S. importers, Trump's tariffs meant skyrocketing costs. Companies that relied on steel, aluminum, or Chinese components saw expenses soar overnight. Some passed costs onto consumers, others cut jobs, and many filed lawsuits. Thousands of importers argued that the tariffs were imposed without proper authority. They claimed Trump abused emergency provisions meant for genuine national security threats, not routine trade disputes. In essence, the lawsuits asked, does a president have unlimited power to impose tariffs on almost anything under the guise of protecting America? The court's early answers leaned toward no. Importers scored key victories, with judges ruling that Trump's use of emergency tariffs exceeded the authority granted by Congress. These rulings set the stage for an even bigger question: whether the government would have to pay refunds on the billions already collected. Chapter 3. Federal courts. Say numbered two federal courts issued rulings that shook the foundation of Trump's tariff program. Judges concluded that many of the emergency tariffs violated statutory and constitutional limits. The courts emphasized that Congress, not the president, holds the power to regulate commerce. While presidents can act in emergencies, Trump's sweeping actions stretched the law far beyond its intended purpose. Instead of narrowly addressing specific threats, the tariffs became a blunt political weapon. For Trump, the rulings were a direct challenge not only to his trade policy, but to his broader philosophy of expansive executive authority. For importers, the decisions offered hope of refunds, massive sums that could reshape corporate balance sheets and global supply chains. Chapter 4. Trump's Supreme Court Appeal. Unwilling to accept defeat, Trump turned to the Supreme Court. His legal team argued that the president must have broad flexibility to act quickly in economic and national security matters. Limiting that authority, they claimed, would cripple America's ability to respond to global threats. The appeal thrust the issue into the national spotlight. On one side stood Trump, defending his signature America First trade policies. On the other stood importers, businesses, and trade groups demanding relief from tariffs they saw as unlawful. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent added fuel to the fire, warning that if the court upheld the lower rulings, refunds could total between $750 billion and $1 trillion. The sheer scale of that figure captured headlines and the attention of lawmakers nervous about the economic fallout. Chapter 5. The trillion-dollar question. How realistic is a trillion-dollar refund? Analysts say it depends on how the court rules and how broadly the decision is applied. If all tariffs deemed illegal were refunded, importers could indeed claim close to $1 trillion. Such a payout would be unprecedented. The U.S. government has faced large settlements before, but never on this scale. The refund would dwarf the bailouts of the 2008 financial crisis and rival the entire annual budget of major federal agencies. Beyond the financial cost, the political optics are staggering. Imagine the federal government writing checks to importers, many of them large corporations, while ordinary Americans face economic struggles. The case has therefore become not only a legal battle, but a test of public perception and political will. Chapter 6. Economic Stakes. The potential refund raises major questions about America's economy. On one hand, importers and consumers would benefit from lower costs if tariffs are rolled back. On the other hand, a $1 trillion payout could strain federal finances, worsen deficits, and destabilize economic planning. Trump and his allies argue that tariffs were never about short-term costs. They were about long-term leverage. By forcing China and other countries to negotiate, they claim tariffs helped rebalance trade. Critics counter that tariffs backfired, hurting U.S. businesses, raising consumer prices, and failing to bring back manufacturing jobs as promised. The Supreme Court's decision will therefore have ripple effects far beyond the courtroom. It could reshape trade, corporate strategy, and government spending for years to come. Chapter 7. Constitutional Questions. At the heart of the case lies a constitutional dilemma. How much power should the president have over trade? The Constitution gives Congress the authority to regulate commerce. But over time, Congress has delegated some of that power to the executive branch, especially in emergencies. Trump's tariffs tested the limits of this delegation. Did Congress grant presidents near total discretion to impose tariffs, or did Trump cross a line? If the Supreme Court sides with Trump, it would affirm an expansive view of presidential power. If it rules against him, it would reassert congressional authority and potentially roll back decades of executive growth. This is why the case is more than just about tariffs. It is about the balance of power between branches of government, a core principle of American democracy. Chapter 8. Political Reactions. Predictably, the potential $1 trillion refund has sparked fierce political debate. Democrats argue that Trump's reckless policies created an economic mess now threatening taxpayers. They call for stricter limits on executive trade powers and accuse Trump of using tariffs as political theater. Republicans are split. Some defend Trump's approach as necessary to confront China and protect American workers. Others worry about the financial and political consequences of massive refunds. Quietly, many lawmakers fear the Supreme Court may hand down a ruling that leaves Congress with a $1 trillion headache. Public opinion is similarly divided. For Trump's supporters, tariffs symbolize strength and independence. For his critics, they are costly blunders now coming home to roost. Chapter 9. Historical Precedents. America has faced tariff battles before. In the early 20th century, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act deepened the Great Depression by sparking global retaliation. In the 1980s, trade disputes with Japan led to targeted tariffs but also paved the way for negotiated agreements. What makes Trump's tariffs different is their scale, speed, and legal vulnerability. No president in modern history has relied so heavily on emergency powers to reshape trade. If the Supreme Court rules against Trump, it could mark a turning point, reigning in executive authority and reshaping trade policy for decades. Conversely, if the court sides with him, It could open the door for future presidents to wield tariffs as sweeping political weapons, bypassing Congress entirely. Chapter 10: The Road Ahead. As the Supreme Court prepares to weigh in, uncertainty looms. Importers await the possibility of refunds that could transform their businesses. Lawmakers brace for the budgetary fallout of a $1 trillion payout. And Trump frames the case as yet another battle between his bold leadership and what he calls the establishment. The court's decision will likely come down to how the justices interpret the balance between executive flexibility and constitutional limits. Whatever the outcome, the ruling will be historic. For Americans, the stakes are clear. This is not just about trade policy. It is about the role of the presidency, the future of economic governance, and the financial stability of the nation itself. Chapter 11: Global Repercussions. The world is watching America's tariff battle with deep concern. For China, the European Union, and other major trading partners, the outcome of this Supreme Court case carries enormous implications. If the court rules against Trump and forces refunds, Beijing may view it as validation that America's tariff war was illegitimate. Chinese officials could use the ruling to argue for compensation in future trade negotiations, strengthening their hand against Washington. Meanwhile, European allies, many of whom faced secondary impacts from Trump's tariffs, may feel emboldened to demand fairer treatment and stronger commitments to multilateral trade rules. Conversely, if the court sides with Trump, it could embolden not only future U.S. presidents but leaders around the world to bypass legislative checks in the name of national security. The precedent could encourage a more unilateral, confrontational approach to global trade, fueling uncertainty in already fragile markets. The potential $1 trillion tariff refund is more than an economic dispute. It is a test of presidential power, constitutional authority, and the resilience of America's financial system. Will the Supreme Court side with Trump and expand executive trade powers? Or will it draw the line and force the government into one of the largest payouts in history? The answer will ripple far beyond Washington. It could reshape the presidency, redefine global trade, and leave taxpayers footing an unimaginable bill. So what do you think? Should presidents have sweeping authority to impose tariffs in the name of national security? Or should Congress reclaim its constitutional role? And how do you think the world will react if America is forced into a $1 trillion refund? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dive documentaries into the issues shaping our world.